For today's video, we have gotten our hands on the 2018 Lexus LC. The LC 500 and 500h are arguably the flagship vehicles for the Lexus brand because these are the most expensive Lexuses that you can buy, and they're also one of the rarest. Some would argue that the LC 500h, which is what we're driving right here, is also a rolling luxury oxymoron, because luxury vehicles don't tend to get excellent fuel economy, but this hybrid model is sleek, it's sexy looking, it stops on a dime, and it handles very well, but it also gets 30 miles to the gallon. Now, on the downside, it is not quite as fast as these sleek good looks would indicate. Although every modern Lexus uses this signature spindle grille, they don't all look exactly the same. So we actually find a different grille going on up front than the Lexus LS sedan, even though the LC and the LS are essentially related. You can think of the LC sort of as the coupe version of the Lexus LS, but they didn't just take this and overinflate it to create the LS or shrink the LS down to create the LC. So while the two vehicles share some architecture under the skin and they share some interior design components, they actually don't share that much 100% directly with each other. We get a slightly more demure grille overall with an aggressive kink right there in the middle, and then headlamps that have been divorced from the daytime running lamp strips right here up front. You'll notice that the turn signals cascade down on the side. And as you'd expect out of a stylish luxury coupe, we have an extremely long hood up front, and it has an aggressive taper right there to the front. Generally speaking, the sales of two-door vehicles in America has been on a gradual decline over the decades. But the luxury segment is still one of the areas where you can find a number of different two-door vehicles. In fact, Lexus actually sells two different two-doors in America. We have the RC and the LC. They're not really that far off in terms of overall size, but the LC is significantly more expensive than the RC because this has been aligned with the Lexus LS. So if you're shopping for an IS or a GS and you want a two-door vehicle, that's where the RC fits in. But if you're willing to pay almost $100,000 base price for your vehicle, then that's where the LS and the LC step in. Because there aren't as many coupes as there used to be in the United States, comparisons with the LC can be just a little bit tricky, because this is overall about the same size as the Mercedes-Benz E-Class coupe, but it costs notably more. Of course, the Mercedes-Benz S-Class coupe is about 10 inches longer than this, and it's also considerably more expensive, so it's in a different category than what we have here. Just about the only two-door that comes in right about the same price as this, and actually about the same 0 to 60 performance base, is actually a Porsche 911. BMW's 6 Series Coupe has taken a momentary hiatus, so at the moment it is not a direct competitor to this, but we will be talking about the last generation model in this video. Now you should know that the BMW 6 Series starts about $20,000 less than the Lexus LC, so in many ways it's also not a direct competitor to this particular car. When you look at the side of the LC, you'll notice that this definitely checks all the right boxes for a performance luxury vehicle. We have large wheels and large brakes on the car, we have well-integrated turn signals on the side, we have a functional vent right back here behind the front door to help relieve pressure and guide airflow around the vehicle, and then unusually we have this little badge right down here at the bottom, which is the badge for the new Lexus multi-stage hybrid system. The rear of the LC is also aggressively styled. We have these very interesting tail lamp modules which have sort of a repeating Nike swoosh going on inside. These are full LED modules, and we also have LED turn signals that mirror what's going on up front, as you can see over there on that side. Twin exhaust tips at the bottom, and of course a blue Lexus logo because this is the hybrid model. Taking a closer look inside the headlamp module, we have those swoosh designs like we see in the DRL and of course in the grille of some Lexus models. And then we have 3 different LED projector modules inside. That's something that Lexus is doing in a lot of their vehicles. When you dive under the hood, you'll notice what really makes the LC different than its European competitors. You won't find a twin-turbo V12 or a twin-turbo V8 under this hood, or actually a twin-turbo anything. Instead of going turbo, Lexus decided to fit the base model, which is the LC 500, with one of the luxury segment's last remaining naturally aspirated V8 engines. It's a 5-liter V8 that produces 471 horsepower, and it's essentially shared with the GSF and the RCF. That engine is mated to a 10-speed automatic transmission, which is shared with just the LC and the LS at the moment. Fuel economy, in case you're wondering, comes in at 19 miles per gallon combined. And then we get this model right here, which is actually more expensive than the LC 500, the LC 500 Hybrid. Instead of a V8 engine, this uses a 3.5-liter naturally aspirated V6 that produces 295 horsepower on its own, and it is then mated to a brand new multi-stage hybrid system that bumps the power up to 354 total. Obviously, that is less than the LC 500, and this does weigh more because the hybrid system and the battery pack add curb weight to the vehicle. And that's why this is about 3 to 4/10 of a second slower than the LC 500. But on the flip side, you do get 30 miles per gallon combined. What's interesting about this hybrid system is that it is very different than the hybrid systems that Lexus has used before it. This is actually the same one that we find in the all-new Lexus LS Hybrid as well. Up till this point, all but one Lexus model used a relatively simple hybrid system. It's based around a single planetary gear set and 2 electric motors. Some people call that an eCVT, but it actually bears no relation to traditional CVTs, so I've usually disliked that particular description. But with this generation of the Lexus hybrid system, they've decided to mate basically that same 2-motor with planetary gear set hybrid system with a 4-speed automatic transmission. I know it sounds weird to have a modern vehicle like this with a 4-speed automatic, but there is logic to the madness. The 4-speed automatic transmission allows the expanded operation of that hybrid system. So it still has the hybrid eCVT, if that's what you want to call it, in front of the 4-speed automatic transmission, and that gives this 10 effective gear ratios. Those ratios are, of course, controlled via software. So the planetary hybrid arrangement will set a specific ratio, and then we have the 4-speed automatic on the other side, and the combination of those two together will give us sort of 10 effective ratios, depending on how you drive the vehicle. It also allows this vehicle to operate in electric-only mode at much higher speeds than previous generations of the Lexus hybrid system. Unfortunately, the LC does not benefit from the latest Lexus seats that we find in the LS luxury sedan, because this was actually designed just a little bit before that. And that's why we find only a 2-way adjustable lumbar support on the driver and front passenger seats. We also don't have an extending thigh cushion in this model. Therefore, I am going to have to give these front seats 7 out of 10 points for the luxury segment. Most vehicles with which the LC logically competes, including the Lexus LS 500 sedan, will have more comfortable and, importantly, more adjustable driver and front passenger seats. We do still, however, have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion and a 3-position seat memory for the driver. It's probably best to think of the rear seats in the LC as a good place to stick your Louis Vuitton handbag, or perhaps a small pet, or maybe some very small shopping, because this is a very, very tight back seat. I actually can't put my foot in the footwells with that seat adjusted for me, and there's really no hope of me ever having my head in an upright position. These are probably the quintessential definition of emergency back seats, and it really would need to be an emergency before I squished myself back here. Although once you do get back here, you'll notice that, as you'd expect out of a really expensive car, the rear compartment is finished very well. There are no hard plastics. Everything is leather coated or Alcantara coated back here. The seats are very nicely done. They're just awfully small. In the interest of structural rigidity, we don't have folding rear seat backs, so there's no pass-through for the trunk, and you'll find the subwoofer right here between the rear seats. This just has 2 seat belts back here in case you're wondering. One of the obvious downsides to a 2-door vehicle over a 4-door vehicle is that we generally have less cargo space in the back, and that is definitely true of the LC. The regular model has a trunk capacity of about 5.5 cubic feet, but if you get the hybrid, then it shrinks even further down to 4.7. That's just about enough room to put one 24-inch roller bag back here. You can put a 22-inch roller bag like this right here, but you actually could not put it in this upright position and still close the trunk lid. Cargo actually has to be pretty darn flush with this opening because of the way this trunk lid is shaped. I think this vehicle was designed with a weekend away in mind, because there is just enough room to put 2 22-inch roller bags, which are incidentally the largest you can carry onto a domestic flight in the US, right back here side by side with some small luggage on either side. And I think if you struggled, you could fit 1 set of golf clubs right back here. But if you have any more luggage than that, it's going to have to sit in the back seat. When it comes to our exclusive trunk comfort index, I'm going to give this compartment 3 out of 10 points, because you could just about squeeze in back here if you really tried, although you just can't close the actual trunk lid. Taking a deeper dive into the trunk, we don't find a spare tire under the cargo area load floor because this uses run flats. There's no spare available at all. There's also nowhere really to put one. We have a small foam divider right here where we find the jack and the tire iron, and then we have a 12-volt battery in front of it. I think the LC has unquestionably the best interior that Lexus has ever crafted. You can see the back seats right there and the soft touch materials, the suede headliner that we see for the back seat area, as well as the front seat area. The front seats feature fixed height shoulder belts and electrically adjusted two-way headrests. Leather upholstery is obviously standard. There's quite an interesting style going on right here. You can see we have this sort of band of leather that goes over the shoulder of the seat. Perforations in the center because these seats are both heated and ventilated. And as you'd expect with a vehicle that has handling in mind, we have fairly aggressive side bolsters. As we move on over to the front door panels, they're made of all soft touch materials. There's a lot of stitched leather going on, suede insert right there with ribs to mimic what's going on the seat. And then we have this very interesting floating door handle right here to actually open the door. You can see it's very nicely trimmed, and then we have a handle to grip right there below it. The overall interior design is definitely sporty as we pan from one side over there to the other, but I also think this is more restrained than we see in some of Lexus's models like the Lexus IS and the Lexus NX. I think this interior is overall going to age a little bit better than those smaller vehicles. Going back to the passenger side, we have one large air vent there and then two smaller ones that sort of point at the ceiling. This button releases the glove compartment below, and this is a fairly small bin and slot style compartment. Sort of like the Lexus LS sedan, we have an interesting textured section right there under the plastic on the passenger side, and then the infotainment screen and that analog clock all exist right behind that same sheet of plastic. The infotainment system is a little bit smaller than what we see in the larger LS sedan, although it is basically the same generation of the software. This does not feature Apple CarPlay or Android Auto at the moment, although it does feature built-in vehicle app integration. If you want to know more about the infotainment system, I do have a complete review of that system on my channel. Below that, we have a single large air vent, controls for the dual zone automatic climate control, engine start-stop button, single slot optical disc player, and then one cup holder right here behind this little door. We have a shifter that functions very much like we see in other Lexus and Toyota hybrids. It's very much like the Prius. It's a joystick. Park is this button right here. For drive, we pull to the left, pull back, and then it returns to center. For reverse, pull to the left, push forward, returns to the center again. If you want the manual mode, you have to be in drive first, and then we just pull back for that manual mode indicated right there. We also have auto brake hold and an EV mode button because, again, we are driving the hybrid. To the right of the shifter, we find some physical buttons for the infotainment system, direct radio media buttons, track forward, backward, tune button, volume knob right here, very large, and then we have this Lexus remote touch controller, which I think is my least favorite input method for an infotainment system. We do have a direct access button to the map, menu, and back button, and then a contextual pop-up button, but everything else is done via this touchpad and basically a cursor on the screen. Between the front seats, we find a leather-wrapped center armrest. The rest of the center console is all wrapped in soft touch stitched material as well. It goes almost all the way down there to the carpet. We press this button to pull this area back, and that reveals another cup holder right there with a divider. You can then pull a lever right here inside to open this compartment to the side, and then we find a moderately sized storage compartment with two USB inputs, auxiliary input, and a 12-volt power port. You can see just about how much room there is there because I have an iPhone 7 Plus inside. If you want to close this, we just press that button and it snaps closed again. Moving over to the driver's side, we find a fairly small LCD instrument cluster. This is basically the same LCD that we also see in the new LS and the new ES. It is definitely smaller than some of those large 12 or 13-inch LCDs we find from some of the European competition. This has a physical ring element in the middle, and if I press the menu button, the ring slides across as the LCD software changes the image. It is an attractive design, but the overall display just seems a little bit small compared to some of those large full LCDs from the competitors. Since we're driving the hybrid vehicle, the display changes based on the drive mode that we're in. So if I move it over to Eco, we get a slightly different display, and then if I move it up to Sport and Sport Plus, the display changes again. Unlike other Lexus hybrid vehicles, you'll notice that even when we're in the Eco mode, we still get this digital tachometer, although we also get this power eco and charge gauge over here on the left side. The LC was the first Lexus vehicle to put the drive mode switch right up here on the side of the instrument cluster. This is how you would toggle between Sport, Sport Plus, Normal, Custom, Comfort, and Eco, etc. This style has followed over into the Lexus LS and ES, and on the other side of the instrument cluster we find the button to turn off traction control and the knob to engage snow mode. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke model with large paddle shifters behind it. I really love these paddle shifters, and I wish that other Lexus models would get this particular design. We have a leather airbag cover in the center. On the right side, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system that is standard, as well as the lane keeping assistance button right there. And then we find track forward, backward for the infotainment system and a mode button. The other infotainment buttons are over here on the left, where we find volume up, down, and a voice command button. And then these buttons control that multifunction LCD right there. And then we have a dedicated phone button as well. The LC also gets a heads-up display, although this is not Lexus's most recent design. So this is not the same display that you see in the Lexus LS, which is enormous. This is actually more similar to what we see in the other Lexus models that have this option available. The first thing you'll notice about the LC 500 out on the road, which is not the version we're driving, that's the non-hybrid model, is the absolutely glorious engine note. It is one of the last naturally aspirated V8 engines in the luxury segment, and it sounds absolutely incredible. The hybrid model, on the other hand, sounds very different. It's quite demure. Even though we do get some V6 engine sounds out of this vehicle, it doesn't sound as good as the 500. And of course, it won't get you from 0 to 60 as quickly. We clocked 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds in this vehicle, which is definitely swift for a Lexus hybrid. However, it is notably slower than that 5-liter V8 model, and it's just not going to sound as good as you're accelerating. The other factor to keep in mind is that the average vehicle with which this competes, which would be $100,000 performance coupes, they're going to go 0 to 60 faster than this. In fact, for the price of the LC Hybrid, you would actually be awfully close to a previous generation BMW M6 coupe. The next generation M6 coupe is likely going to be more expensive. I expect it's probably going to come in right around $120,000 or so. But the previous generation model really wasn't that far off a fully loaded LC 500 hybrid. The performance numbers of the LC, I think, are the biggest thing to keep in mind when comparing this with the competition. Essentially, all of the European entries have options that go faster 0 to 60 than the LC for less cash. What makes the hybrid perhaps more of an enigma is that acceleration really is the only area in which this lags the competition. Because in our 60 to 0 braking score, this stopped in an incredibly short 105 feet. That's not just short for hybrid, that's short for any performance luxury car, whether it's a 2-door or a 4-door. And that's keeping in mind that the model that we're driving weighs nearly 4,500 pounds. The other area where the LC 500 excels is in handling. This handles incredibly well, whether we're talking about the hybrid or the non-hybrid model. When it comes to overall handling ability, the LC is absolutely excellent. Lexus has long had a history of creating vehicles with very precise suspensions, very precise steering racks, etc., and that all is true for the LC as well. Now, a lot of people I've talked to are surprised by that, but Lexus actually has a long history of making vehicles that dynamically are definitely solid competitors to the Germans. The difference for Lexus is basically what we see going on in this vehicle. They don't generally compete with the high horsepower options from the competition. So that leads some people to think that overall the models are not quite as dynamic, but that's not actually true. This definitely competes very well with other similarly powerful models from the competition. Even the hybrid model that we're driving here has a near perfect weight balance. This has just a hair more weight up front, which generally is what most people prefer, but it's essentially 50-50. With a curb weight of nearly 4,500 pounds, and of course a mission that is different than something like a Mercedes E-Class or Lexus's own RC coupe, the LC is quite livable even out here on rougher roads, and the model that we're driving does have lower profile tires than the base model of the LC, and this is still a very comfortable, livable ride. The LC is definitely targeting someone that wants a Gran Turismo or GT style ride that is pretty common in the larger and more expensive luxury coupe segment. Now, this is not quite as soft, not quite as comfortable as the Mercedes-Benz S-Class coupe, but that is notably more expensive than the model we're driving. It also is about 10 inches longer, so it actually is kind of playing to a different person. So I think the S-Class is really targeting a different kind of shopper in this segment. Instead, the 6 Series and the LC both are targeting a good balance between ride and handling, and that's why I'm going to give this particular model an A. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, this vehicle scored 70 decibels. That's likely thanks to the large tires that we have on this model. So this is going to be a little bit louder out on the road than something like the Lexus LS, because that has more of a luxury mission in mind. When it comes to overall fuel economy, it's pretty easy to give this model an A+. We have been averaging just over 30 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. It's pretty typical for Lexus hybrid systems to get over their EPA ratings, and that is true for this hybrid system, even though it is quite different than the ones that came before it. The previous Lexus hybrid systems, like the one that we find in the Lexus RX and the Lexus GS, operate differently than this hybrid system. Even though architecturally the Lexus RX and the Lexus GS share essentially nothing with one another, one's a front-wheel drive crossover, the other one is a rear-wheel drive luxury sedan, they actually use hybrid systems that are thematically identical. When you floor the car, the engine will spool up to a particular speed where we get the most engine power for the best acceleration, and then it will just sort of hang out there as you accelerate. When you're hill climbing, the engine RPMs will gently rise and then they will gently lower depending on the terrain. It all sounds an awful lot like a CVT, which is again why some people call them eCVTs. But this hybrid system is actually quite different. Lexus has that 4-speed transmission behind the system, so there is some actual gear shifting going on with this hybrid system, but then we also get some sort of imitation shifts from the hybrid system as well. And this car follows its shift patterns whether we're in the Eco mode, dialed up with that dial right there on the instrument cluster, or whether we're in Sport or Sport Plus. And that is again very different than the other Lexus systems. The inclusion of the stepped automatic transmission changes the overall feel of this hybrid system significantly, because accelerating in the GS hybrid or the RX hybrid actually feels a little bit more like accelerating in an electric vehicle. But I would say that this hybrid system actually feels more like a twin turbocharged V6 from the competition. We get those definite shifts out of the system. Now, they don't all feel quite exactly the same. Some of them feel just a little bit different than others. That's logically because some of them are those actual physical shifts and some of them are the hybrid system doing its thing. But the overall acceleration, the massive amount of torque that we get from the electric motors, and the quick shifting transmission just makes this feel more like one of the turbocharged Germans than you'd expect. This is quite simply the most fun hybrid I think I've ever driven, and that would actually include something even like the BMW i8. The i8 has a really interesting and novel hybrid system, but I don't think it's quite as well sorted and quite as much fun as what we have in the LC. I think there are only two major downsides to this hybrid system. The first one is that this is more expensive than the 5-liter V8, and I think that it actually should be less expensive because it's not quite as fast 0 to 60. The other thing that comes to mind is that this hybrid system really needs to be put under the hood of the Lexus IS, the GS, and basically anything that it will fit in, because this is a really well-sorted hybrid. The Lexus LC is an interesting car. It's a style-forward, expensive luxury coupe, but it doesn't have that many corollaries in the luxury landscape. It's not quite the same thing as an Audi R8, nor is it an S-Class coupe. It could be seen, interestingly enough, as a BMW 8 Series competitor, however, because we recently got pricing information on that model. Starting at $96,510 for the hybrid version that we were driving this week and $92,200 for the LC 500, the LC is one of the most expensive Lexus models that you can buy. And because of that, it's also not a direct competitor to something like the Jaguar F-Type or an Audi A5 coupe, which are both considerably less expensive. But I suppose you could consider it a value alternative to something like an Acura NSX, which is $156,000, but again, also not the same kind of thing. This makes comparisons tricky, but let's dive right on in. Our first competitor is the S560, and the S560 is about as fast as the LC 500, but it's about $32,000 more expensive, even though again, the LC is nearly $100,000. All-wheel drive is standard to the Mercedes, but the Mercedes overall is much bigger. It actually has a practical and relatively usable back seat. It definitely feels bigger out on the road, however, and it's really obvious when you drive the two back to back. And as a result, the S-Class is not as engaging, but it is more luxurious, and you do have a variety of options available in that S-Class that you simply don't find in the Lexus. Of course, if speed is your thing, there are also two different AMG models to choose from that will go up to $250,000 and be notably faster than any LC available. That's why I said that the S-Class really isn't the same sort of thing, because even if you had all of the options available to the LC, it's going to be notably less expensive than an S-Class. It's also a different character of vehicle. I suppose you could also compare the LC 500 to an Audi R8, which is Audi's expensive performance coupe, but the difference between those two vehicles in terms of type of vehicle is even larger. So instead, let's talk about an RS5 coupe instead. The Audi RS5 starts at $69,990, which is considerably less than the LC, but it's also a smaller vehicle overall. The RS5 is targeted at someone who wants blistering performance, good handling ability, etc. It will go 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds for that basic $70,000 price point. It feels a little bit more modern on the inside, but the Lexus is notably more comfortable and more luxurious. The Audi feels more buttoned down, but because of the weight balance, it actually feels a little bit less precise at times versus the Lexus. The Lexus actually has a really great exhaust note as well if you don't get the hybrid model. The RS5 will unquestionably out-accelerate and out-handle the LC, but acceleration and handling are not necessarily the two big reasons to buy a vehicle like the Lexus. Yes, it handles well, yes, it accelerates quickly, but a lot of what is going on in the large luxury coupe arena is brand, it's the comfort level, the luxury level, the way that it looks, the way that it rides, drives, etc. It's the whole package deal. It's not just about raw numbers when it comes to acceleration or handling. And that's why it's a little bit difficult to compare a vehicle like the RS5, which is about those absolute numbers, to something like the Lexus LC, which arguably is not. That brings us along to the 2019 Jaguar F-Type. It is a little bit more precise in its overall feel, like the Audi RS5, although it definitely feels more direct and more engaging than that Audi. It starts in the same general realm as the Audi S5 and RS5 in terms of overall price as well. It starts at $60,750, which gives you a 296 horsepower engine. It'll get you 0 to 60 slower than the LC500, but if you're willing to spend $100,000 on your Jaguar, then you can go 0 to 60 half second faster than the LC. And of course, if $122,000 is laying around in your pocket, you can get 0 to 60 a second faster. But of course, the Jaguar is not the same sort of thing either, because it is a two-door, two-seat vehicle, not a two-door, four-seat vehicle. It's considerably smaller. It doesn't ride or feel quite the same on the inside. The Lexus is more comfortable and arguably more luxurious, even in top-end trims of the Jaguar F-Type. That brings us along to the newest entry in this segment, which is the BMW 8 Series. It's a brand new vehicle for 2019, and thematically it seems to be the only real direct competitor at the moment, because it's about the same size as the LC. It's smaller than an S-Class, but larger than the average mid-size coupe in this segment. It also appears to be tuned very much like the Lexus. This is something that we've seen out of BMW in their latest mid-level performance models, like the M550. Although we haven't driven it yet, I expect the 8 Series to have a relatively similar suspension tune. It's likely going to be a little bit on the firm side, but not punishing by any measure. It's also likely going to be very comfortable on the inside from everything that we've seen about that particular model. It's definitely a style-forward, large, luxurious coupe from BMW. BMW has priced it somewhat similar to the LC as well. It's less expensive than the S-Class for sure, won't top out nearly where the S-Class coupe does, but it does start higher than the LC at $111,900. They are claiming it will also be about a second faster 0 to 60. We'll have to reserve our judgment, of course, until we can get our hands on one for a complete week, but it does look like an interesting option for this segment. Overall, the Lexus LC is an interesting enigma. It proves what Lexus can do when building a style-forward luxury vehicle. It's futuristic, it's impeccably built, it's precise, it has a great engine note if you get the non-hybrid version, and if you get the hybrid model, then it's one of a very select breed of fun-to-drive hybrids. The hybrid system is one of the really unique features about the LC500. And I have to say that I would probably buy the LC hybrid over the LC non-hybrid if my money were actually on the line. And I realize that sounds a little bit odd because the 0 to 60 acceleration is a little bit lower and we don't have that excellent exhaust note. But I think if I were living with the vehicle on a daily basis, I would pick the hybrid because of its better fuel economy, its smooth driving nature, and the fact that you aren't really giving up anything else in this process. It also is kind of an interesting conversation piece. And honestly, if you're spending $100,000 on a vehicle, you want something that's a little bit unique, a little bit interesting, and the non-hybrid version of the LC doesn't quite have that. But the hybrid version, strangely enough, for me at least, does. I really appreciate the out-of-box thinking that went into creating the LC hybrid system, and I wish that Lexus would quickly put that same hybrid system into other vehicles in their lineup. On the flip side, I also have to say that if I were going to spend six figures on a brand new vehicle, then I would probably really look long and hard at that new BMW 8 Series. It looks really, really tasty, although again, we haven't driven it yet. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Click on those related videos if you haven't already done so. Be sure and click up there to the top of your screen so you can support this channel over at patreon.com. And you can always find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos so you can see what we're driving this week. I'll see you later.